Hello again, Buckeye fans. It is time for the Silver Bullet Podcast. I am Michael Citro.
And I'm Chip Minnich.
And Chip, did you enjoy the open week this weekend?
Well, other than the last few minutes of the play, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the rest of the show? How about that?
I mean, do I have that right? Is this the open week? We didn't play anybody, right?
Yeah, really. I wish I could say that, but let's just say that you and I both were kind of the outliers on the prediction, and as we both kind of said last week, we hoped that we were wrong, but we were proven to be right.
So it's our fault. If we would have just picked Ohio State to win, everything would have been fine.
I'm sure that's how it usually works. That's the power of our podcasting wisdom or lack thereof.
Well, I've had people blaming me for this loss, and because I mentioned on Twitter the other day that I have a wife and a daughter who have October birthdays that are 2 days apart. We live in Central Florida. They both very much like Disney, and I have been to Disney World, one of the parks or another, twice previously on Ohio State football Saturdays. Once in 2009 when Ohio State went to Purdue. We all know how that went, Purdue Harbor. And then the next year again, and this time I left the parks to come home and see the game, but it took me so long to get home that I missed about the first 8 minutes of the game, and that was the game at Wisconsin where the opening kickoff was returned for a touchdown, and Wisconsin went on to win that game. So I was 0 for 2. I went again Saturday, and I left plenty early, got home well before kickoff. In fact, took my daughter to a birthday party, other daughter, not the birthday daughter, and I just said, you know what? I think I'm home. I'm wearing my lucky shirt. Everything's good. It's not going to happen this year. Third time's a charm. No, that's not the case. So, since I mentioned it on Twitter, everybody was, well, not everybody, a few people were like, man, you blew it. And I'm like, well, yes, me going to a particular spot on the globe should have all of the influence in the world on the Ohio State Buckeyes. But I'm not taking any chances. I have already said Sundays only from now on during football season.
Okay, because I was just going to say, while you were giving me the history of the curse as it relates to Ohio State football and your excursions, looking ahead to the 2019 season, Ohio State in 2019 has a bye week on October 12th. So you can plan if it has to be on a Saturday, October 12th is your day.
Okay. That's good knowledge, Chip. Thank you for that. And
I do what I can.
I just have to tell the girls, hey, we're going to have to celebrate early.
There you go.
So one's on the 15th and one's on the 17th. And people were like, well, what's wrong with you? You should definitely not go. What's wrong? And I'm like, I kind of like being married, and what I don't have a leg to stand on. It's like, you say it out loud and it just sounds stupid. If I go to Disney, Ohio State loses. It just sounds stupid because they have nothing to do with each other. And yet, 2 times, okay, maybe it's a coincidence. 3 times, that's a trend.
What was it? Wasn't there a commercial with fantasy football where something it only seems crazy if it doesn't work or something like that, where they had all these people doing all these bizarre things as it related to like their fantasy football teams or something like that.
Yeah.
So never underestimate the power of superstition. Put it that way.
Yeah. So anyway, you picked Purdue's score correctly. And I had 45 for Purdue, so I was pretty close to the eventual prediction. But we both had Ohio State scoring way more points in this game, and it is mind-boggling that a team could put up almost 550 yards of offense and only score 20 points, especially this Ohio State team. We heard about red zone issues, but I feel like if you go back and look at all the red zone opportunities throughout the season, that red zone issues are a very, very recent problem, like maybe a 1 week problem.
I don't know about that, though, because there were also red zone issues against Minnesota. So it seemed as though that they kind of carried on from the Minnesota game onto Purdue, that it just I'm not sure what it is. The reason I'm kind of struggling and stammering to articulate it, I'm not sure if it's a personnel issue with the offensive line. I'm not sure if it's the scheme, but something to be said about Ohio State getting in the red zone and having to settle for field goals. And as it was, they missed a field goal, plus the fact that they had the fourth down play, which people were saying, that the pass was rushed, and Dwayne Haskins, maybe he threw it too hard. Personally, from my perspective, I thought even if KJ Hill had caught that fourth down attempt near the goal line, he would have been tackled short.
Yeah, that was my initial thought was the exact same thing on that play. I thought, what a bad play call. Even if he catches it, it doesn't get in. You have to get in. I don't understand the play calling, why everything is so horizontal at the goal line.
Right.
In the red zone, everything was horizontal. And you and I have talked and touched a lot on the running game, and I am still a firm believer that if you don't commit to the running game and stay with the running game will never improve, because we've seen Ohio State teams in the past have not great running days, but all of those hits, all of those blocks, all of those runs add up over the course of 60 minutes of football, and a 2-yard run in the first quarter is going to get you 5 yards in the fourth quarter if you stay with it and you commit to it. And those 6 to 8 yard runs in the first quarter are going to get you, home runs in the fourth quarter or explosion plays in the running game. We're not seeing this coaching staff have any confidence in staying with the run. And you could say, well, if it's because they're not having success, but I think it's that's circular logic. They're not having success because they're not committing to it. And part of that is in the red zone. And we saw there was one series where I think they were at the 8, I want to say. They gave it to Dobbins, and he got him to the 3 on first down. And then I think he was stuffed for about a half a yard on second down, and then they tried a throw, and it didn't work. I think it was it may have been a little of the wind. I think there were a couple of plays into the wind at the red zone that one of them hung up, and the defensive back was able to swat it out of the hands of, I believe, Benjamin Victor. And that was one of those things where the old Ohio State would have just said, no, we're going to run again, and if we don't get in, we're going to run again. And we're not seeing that, and I know that the run game hasn't been that successful, but again, if you don't continue to do it, you're not going to get anywhere. And that's just my feeling on it. I think you're seeing a coaching staff that says, wow, we only got 3 yards on that play, but we have Dwayne Haskins, so we're going to throw in the next 10 plays.
Gerd is of the opinion, he believes this might be the worst Ohio State running that he has ever seen. Mm-hmm. And I'm drawing back on, I know that we've talked about the 2004 team and the struggles that they had, and everyone remembers the 2003 team without Claret. But this team, for example, against Minnesota collectively, if you recall, they didn't go over 100 yards. Mm-hmm. They averaged 2.9 yards a carry in that game. This game against Purdue, again, not even close to 100 yards, and they were exactly 3 yards a carry. So there's something I can see where you're coming from when it comes to the idea of sticking with it and eventually it's going to break through. But I'm so inclined to believe that it has to do with the coaching staff's I'm just going to say stubbornness and refusing to abandon the zone read, and they need to go to either a pro set or the I formation or just run power or something different than what they're doing, because to that point, that would supposedly last year after the Iowa game, Coach Greg Studara supposedly made comments about let's just run power right at Michigan State. And the speculation was Ohio State was going to lose to Michigan State. And the next thing you know, Mike Weber was just blasting big run after big run on the Spartans. And nobody saw that coming. Mm-hmm. So my point is that they can adjust, and I think both Gerd and Tom Orr were onto something, which is kind of unfortunate for Ohio State fans. But if they're just grasping at whatever silver linings we can possibly find, is that it seems as though after Ohio State suffers a substantial loss in embarrassing fashion, such as when Ohio State was shut out by Clemson last year, when they lost to Iowa, whatever you want to think of, that it seems as though that's when Urban Meyer finally acknowledges that changes have to be made. It's unfortunate that it has to be like that. It should be, because it's, as we said, these were things, the fact that you and I both predicted Ohio State to lose to Purdue was because we could see the ominous storm clouds approaching. Mm-hmm. And we're talking about coaches who are making almost as much money as you from the ozone, Michael. I don't know, but they're being paid. They're being paid quite handsomely. In all seriousness, the coaching staff is being paid quite handsomely. How is it that all of the fans who religiously follow Ohio State football have been concerned about the Ohio State running game for the last several weeks, not just going into Purdue, but several previous weeks? How is it that they haven't made changes when changes are so glaringly needed?
Well, that's a good question, and I actually had slated that for us to talk about now that we're coming up against the bye week, so maybe we can get into that a little bit later in the program. 49-20 was the final. I can't believe Ohio State only could put up 20 points against Purdue's defense. Purdue does not have a good defense. We talked about their rankings last week in the various categories. They weren't ranked highly really in any category. I did think Ohio State could run the ball better against them, but again, they didn't really stick to it. I mean, I think there was a point in the game in the first half where they threw something like 12 straight passes. And they finished with 73 passing attempts in the game, Chip. 73, yeah. 25 rushing attempts. Now, some of that's dictated by being behind on the scoreboard in the second half, and some of it's just dictated by, not being successful, getting behind the chains. There were a lot of penalties, some holding penalty on Demetrius Knox that wiped out a pretty nice run by Weber. There was, false starts. I mean, there were a lot of mistakes made in this game on both sides of the ball. The defensive side of the football, especially, with some backbreaking mistakes. An uncharacteristic roughing the passer on Draymond Jones, just a ridiculous roughing the punter after you get back in the game and get a stop on defense on Davon Hamilton, and just some really curious play calling by the coaches. Late in the first half, you have, Jeff Brom's a tricky dude, and if there's ever going to be a time when he's going to fake a field goal, it's on 4th and short at the end of a half. And Kendall Sheffield didn't play safe. He went in there trying to block a field goal. And all he has to do is stand on the end of the line, and he's probably going to make a tackle for loss there. So there were a lot of curious problems. It reminds everybody, obviously, for many reasons, of the Iowa game last year, because night game, team in black and gold, big emotional cry over, outpouring of support for sick children, or in this case, a sick student, Tyler Trent at Purdue, and just a litany of Ohio State mistakes, not only on the field, but in coaching decisions as well. And it's not all on Urban Meyer. He's ultimately where the buck stops. But calling certain defenses, calling certain offensive plays, these are on the guys that he's hired to make these calls. Tom wrote a great article about calling back to Urban, saying he expected to put together the best coaching staff in America, and this doesn't look like the best coaching staff in America. Although on paper you got a lot of ex-head coaches, it should be a very effective head coaching staff. It has not been this season very good at making adjustments. It has not been very good at figuring out how to correct some schemes. I don't know what's going on with the linebackers. They're not getting better. Obviously, I think we've all identified that the linebacking coach is the weakest link now that Zach Smith is out of the picture. We've seen a notable improvement in the receivers, in fact, since Zach Smith left. We would like to see the same thing from the linebacking play. One of the things I've noticed, I'm not sure if it's just something that Schiano brought in this year new or if Alex Grinch brought in, but Chip, I can't remember Ohio State lining up so many linebackers at the line of scrimmage that they're doing this year, and it exacerbates the problem of having bad angles from the safeties when all they have to do is pop through the line of scrimmage and they're into the secondary.
No, I'm glad you brought that up, and you're not the only one who has noticed it. When you talk about the defensive scheme with the linebackers, based on things that I've read on social media, comments from former Ohio State linebackers such as Bobby Carpenter, Andrew Sweat, James Laurinaitis, Chris Spielman, they're all openly questioning the defensive scheme that Ohio State is running. One of the things that you brought up, and this is, it's, as you said very accurately, that by having the linebackers so close to the line of scrimmage, for example, one of the 42-yard touchdown runs by DJ Knox was as a result of Malik Harrison so close to the line of scrimmage, he was easily blocked out of the play, which allowed for the aforementioned 42-yard touchdown run. And so it's those kind of things where when you have former linebackers, as I said, Carpenter, Laurinaitis, et cetera, all openly questioning what the Ohio State coaching staff is doing, it just makes you wonder. I'm sure you've heard that old expression about how insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. The fact that these previous Ohio State greats at the position for weeks leading up to the Purdue game, but especially now that we have an open week after the Purdue game, that it's just everyone is wondering what is going on. Chris Spielman made the point that, and I'm reluctant to agree with him, but I think he's onto something, is that having known Urban Meyer for so many years, one of the hallmarks of Urban Meyer's teams was that traditionally those teams got better as the season progressed. And unfortunately, it seems as though this team is actually regressing in a number of different areas. We've already touched on the running game and the poor job there. We're talking right now about the defensive scheme and how the linebackers are being caught out of position, allowing for big plays. Purdue capitalized on that. The only point of difference that I would make between the Purdue loss and the Iowa loss is that last year the Iowa loss was the week after that big comeback against Penn State. So it was almost as though Ohio State was still basking in the glory of that tremendous comeback, and they went on the road. Whereas with the Purdue game, as you and I have been saying and others have been saying, there have been some warning signs leading up to this. The Indiana game, the Minnesota game, that there were kind of, okay, we're not be able to run the ball and we're giving up big plays. And, oh, by the way, Purdue is a team that Ohio State has lost more frequently there than any other time in this century. So it wasn't as though that, and I think even throughout the summer, I think a lot of people were kind of looking at, okay, is there a trap game on Ohio State's schedule? Oh, it's going to be Purdue because they've had problems there. So that's where I would say that it's not a huge difference of opinion. It just seems as though that the Purdue game was not as surprising. I think if there was a surprise that you and I certainly agree on, it wasn't the fact that Purdue beat Ohio State. It was the fact that Ohio State offensively was so incapable of keeping pace. That's kind of the way that you and I both saw that game going into it, that it was going to be high scoring. Nobody anticipated Ohio State only putting up 20 points and certainly having the issues within the red zone that we've already discussed.
I don't want to harp too much on the defense because I will tell you this. A lot of people are going to point to the final score. A lot of people are going to point to the fourth quarter. But through three quarters, Purdue had 21 points, and one of those touchdowns was aided by a fake field goal. I think
Right.
the defense, for what we expected from Purdue's offense, you and I meaning, I think the
Yes.
defense did a good job, and I think if you would have said, ultimately 28 points would have won the game, but I think if you and I had been told, hey, Purdue's going to score 28 points this week, you and I would have felt pretty good about an Ohio State win, probably even covering the spread.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
So going into the fourth quarter, Purdue has 21 points. The problem is, I think Ohio State had 6 at that point. So it was definitely playing catch up on the road, which is never good. Obviously, Purdue was playing very emotionally. I don't believe anybody on that defense missed a tackle all day long. I mean, Dobbins had one man to beat several times and couldn't beat him. Weber, same thing. There was one play where Weber was dragged down from behind, and I don't think he's stopped if he doesn't get pulled down from behind by that one guy who had a shot at him. So there were opportunities there. Purdue made plays. Ohio State didn't. But I don't think the defense. I mean, eventually the defense wore down and gave up some big plays in the fourth quarter. They gave up the two long Knox runs, and obviously the Haskins pick six. You see the 49 points, and you sort of mentally put that on the defense, but that's not on the defense. So I think for the most part, the defense kept the team in the game, and on any other night, you would normally see this offense, putting up a big lead and making Purdue one-dimensional. And a lot of that was, they pointed this out on the broadcast a number of times, blitzing the linebackers up the middle on first and second down. And, DJ Knox, I think, had 82 yards on 2 carries. So I think that for the most part, they had him shut down pretty good through the first 3 quarters of the game.
Yeah, the defense, like I said, I agree with you that if we had known going into the fourth quarter that Ohio State that they were behind, but oh, by the way, Purdue has only scored 21 points, and that we would have been, I don't want to say thrilled, but we would have been happy. We would have been pleased, because the anticipation was that the defense was the weak link coming into this. It seemed as though that the offense, its inability to score, especially in the red zone, kind of led to, in a matter of speaking, the defensive breakdowns, that those big plays by that time, the defense. And I realize Urban Meyer pointed out how there's a lot of injuries, but he also is quick to point out that everyone at this time of year has injuries. So it just seems as though like the injury card is something that he likes to go to try to excuse some of the issues that Ohio State's facing, when the reality is I think there are just so many things that are contributing, the offense, the defense. Everything needs a lot of work. This team looks tired. The coaching staff looks tired. The coaching staff looks like they have kind of run out of answers and don't know what to do. And not that they're going to get the week off, even though the players are going to get an opportunity to rest their bodies, because this is usually a big recruiting weekend for the coaching staff. Mm-hmm. But maybe this is an opportunity for the coaching staff to kind of mentally recharge their batteries and come at fixing what seems to be a lot of issues on both sides of the ball. I want to go back to something that you said a few moments ago about the great article that Tom wrote for the Ozone, because the fact that Urban Meyer made it such a point of identifying and stating that he wanted to find the best coaches in America when he was hired back in November 2011. And Tom's article touched on that. I also want to give credit to Doug Lesmerises of Cleveland.com, because he indirectly had some of the same points, and some of the ways that he went about it a little differently than Tom is that, in Doug Lesmerises' perspective, is that he specified that Urban Meyer, that the fact that he has such a close personal relationship with so many of the people on this current staff, such as Bill Davis, such as Greg Schiano, that it seemed as though that the coaching staff, that the results were better when he did not have that close previous personal relationship. And some of the examples that Doug Lesmerises brought up was Tom Herman, Ed Warner. In 2013, the defense needed to be adjusted. So in 2014, they brought in Chris Ash and they hired Larry Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the fact that Larry Johnson he's been on the staff and he's the best assistant coach on that staff, in my opinion. But that Urban Meyer has such a close personal relationship. He knew, Bill Davis, previously, his best man. I like the way that Gerd and Tom put it. Like, that must have been one hell of a bachelor party kind of thing.
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, I think that there's something to be said about just because you're have a close personal relationship with this person does not make them an ideal fit for the coaching staff. So I'm not anticipating any changes during the bye week. I know a lot of fans are hoping for that, and a lot of fans are demanding that. I think you're kind of wasting your time and energy. I do wonder, though, if at the end of the season, if we don't see some substantial changes to the coaching staff, because it certainly seems warranted based on what we have seen during this season.
Yeah, you just can't replace them in season, so it's really difficult. You're usually, when someone gets fired in season, you're elevating other people to the next position. I mean, Oklahoma just did that, or you're plugging someone in to get you through the rest of the season, and then you've got to go out and do a search. But so I don't expect any coaching staff transition. You mentioned, guys that maybe didn't have a close relationship with Urban. I'm not sure that he had a close relationship with Brian Hartline prior to this year.
Yeah, that's fair.
And he's arguably has done one of the best jobs on that staff getting that. I mean, the last several years we've discussed the receiving core ad nauseum, and now the receivers probably the strongest group on the team other than maybe quarterback.
Yeah,
and defensive line also. Yeah,
right. I think that Ryan Day did not have that previous relationship with Urban Meyer, but he had the strong endorsement of Steve Adazio, who he previously worked for, and Steve Adazio and Urban Meyer have a close personal relationship. But the point being that when Urban Meyer makes the statement that I want to find the best coach in America for the program, I'm not necessarily sure that was accomplished by hiring the best man from his wedding to coach linebackers.
Right. I think you're right. I think it's always easier though to throw somebody's old words back at them in when times are tough. I think that's pretty easy thing to do as well. So it's I get what you're saying, and I get where people are coming from, and I certainly think there's a lot of frustration out there when it comes to Bill Davis. Especially, I know that Greg Schiano's getting some heat because the defense has not done a great job this year, but it's really been a couple of position groups, specifically the safeties and linebackers, specifically one safety spot and the linebackers. So, but as you see with any unit, if you got one position group not holding steady, like the offensive line, for example, the whole thing falls apart because it's a team game. So I'm not sure how much of it's on Schiano. I mean, Schiano's had mostly a pretty good tenure, I think, at Ohio State. Obviously, the Iowa game sticks out. This year hasn't been quite as smooth. But again, that's two layers or two levels of the defense that's not working right now. And really, if it wasn't for Jordan Fuller, it would be both safety positions and the linebackers. But we'll see what happens. I think basically when you have a team this talented and things are not working well, if you just go back to your basics, just be vanilla, you may not win pretty, but you should at least get back in the win column. You should at least be able to start wearing down opponents and showing your superiority and talent.
No, I think we've been talking about that, getting back to just simplifying the offense, which is kind of what earlier in the podcast I was saying, get rid of the zone read. It's not fooling anyone. And Dwayne Haskins is just not capable of doing it in the manner that they would like him to do. So why they continue to try and put him in a position where he's not going to succeed is perplexing. And somebody else made a point. I'm not sure who it was. I don't know if it was even anyone on the Ozone radio network, but somebody made a point, and I thought I never thought of it this way, was what's going on with Dwayne Haskins' legs, because they showed that scramble against Michigan last year up in Ann Arbor when he was flushed out of the pocket and he was able to take off on a scramble and pick up positive yardage. And then when you watch him run now, and the thing that's just kind of in my mental image is of Dwayne Haskins on Saturday night in West Lafayette trying to slide and just looking very, very uncomfortable and awkward doing so. So I just think, like you said, be vanilla, be basic, whatever we want to call it. Let's go back to, all right, what can our offensive, if you're not going to change personnel, which I know there's a lot of clamoring to do, but what can they do well when it comes to run blocking? Because the zone read is not working with the quarterback we have.
Right.
If that means a power scheme, then run that. If that means we're going to run a pro set because we have two backs that we want to get on the field at the same time, do that. But figure out what they can do and just do it.
Right.
Because it seems very odd to be this late in the season and not being focused on what your players can do and trying to have them do things that they're not, I don't want to say that they cannot do, but that they are not able to do at a high level.
Yeah, I think that you're on to something with, I'm not really opposed to going I formation. I think if you put Dobbins and Weber on the field together and take some turns with them, I mean, I feel comfortable with either of those guys blocking a linebacker. I think both of them are capable of blocking a linebacker. And if they can't, you bring in a tight end to do it, because there's no fullbacks on this roster really. So, there's things they can do. The main thing for me, the run blocking, is a very basic fact of football, and you'll hear Chris Spielman say this a lot. Low man wins, short yardage especially. Low man wins. These guys are behemoths. Are they too big? Do we need to bring in smaller, quicker linemen on the roster to maybe give them a shot? I mean, we did talk about personnel. This is the week to do it. You got a bye week. You got some time to work some other guys in. Brandon Bowen is supposedly getting healthier. Maybe Brady Taylor is worth a look. It's easy to say it when we're not in practice every day. These are the guys. These 5 guys on the field won their jobs. So there's a reason why they won their jobs. So you kind of have to assume that they won it by showing that they were better in practice. But maybe some of these guys in a game situation would be better.
Possibly. The only reason why I'd be kind of confused as to why they're not able to run behind this line is because not all of them, but several of them played last year. Demetrius Knox was thrust into the starting role when Bowen was injured. So he's been out there. Now, granted, Michael Jordan is playing a different position, which is one of the arguments for moving him back to guard from the center position. Isaiah Prince was in the lineup. So 3 out of the 5 were starters last year. Now, granted, they didn't have Thayer Munford. They didn't have Malcolm Pridgeon in the starting lineup. So maybe there might be something to be said about, because they are, like you said, they are huge. I just wonder if it's not only a factor of the size of the offensive lineman, but the lack of mobility that Dwayne Haskins has at the quarterback position that is also impacting the quality of the run blocking.
It is, and there's other aspects, and there's other factors included in that as well. I mean, you talked about Jordan moving to a different position. One thing we didn't talk about, we've talked about it in the past, but not tonight on this podcast, is that Billy Price is gone. Maybe you don't have the leader on that offensive line you once had. The leadership can go a long way. And we've seen it pointed out in multiple broadcasts this year that the fundamentals are lacking. I mean, they talked about Prince in that Minnesota game where he was too upright. He wasn't moving his hips. He wasn't moving his legs. His back was too straight, and he was getting beat as a result. And even when he was in position, he was getting beat because he didn't have any the proper lean and the proper technique. So I think that there's a multitude of problems, and a bye week is exactly what this team needs.
Yeah, and they look tired. They look tired on both sides of the ball. And I'm not suggesting that they don't have a reason to be tired, because football is a violent game, and they've been playing besides not just the games themselves, but with the training camp and everything like that. So the bye week, I'm sure, is going to be a welcome sight for all the players. But it just seems as though not only the physical demands, but mentally, that just the stress, that they need a break.
They talked about a lot of the players talked about being tired the week after the Penn State game. And you wonder almost if the coaching staff tried to make sure that letdown didn't happen again. Maybe they worked them too hard that next week, and maybe that's been that continued to snowball. Maybe a poor performance against Indiana, we're going to work even harder. Poor performance against Minnesota, we're going to work even harder. Maybe they just need to get back to having fun and playing football.
Against Nebraska, the concerns that I have now, and I know we'll talk about Nebraska in greater detail next week, is that it was announced that game is going to be a noon kickoff. And for a team that has been notoriously slow coming out of the gate, that's something that's kind of looming on my mind. Is, like you said, let's get back to having fun. But this team, it just seems as though they're notoriously slow starters out of the gate. And let's just hope that they rekindle that love and enthusiasm for football during the bye week.
Well, aren't they also going to be wearing a special uniform?
They are going to be wearing the black jerseys, and that, to me, that whole gimmick. Personally, I'm a traditionalist. I make no bones about it. I'm still one of those people still kind of charged up over the fact that they don't have the gray sleeve on the scarlet jersey. Let alone let's throw completely different jerseys out just to try and make a buck.
Well, the kids like them. They seem to get excited about wearing them, and that's partly why they do it. And obviously, a money grab is the main reason why they do it. But the kids do get excited about them a bit, and I don't like them. I'm with you. I say go back to the gray stripes on the sleeves. Go back to the giant numbers they had in the 90s.
Yeah.
That you can see from outer space. Those were great. I think those old Eddie George uniforms were some of the best uniforms we've ever had, and I love the home scarlets. I don't like to mess with that, and but if they're going to do it, maybe that'll counter affect the noon kickoff. The other reason that you have the noon kickoff, of course, is that you're bringing in a team from an earlier time zone. You're hoping that they'll even be more groggy than your team. So it didn't really work against Minnesota, but all of a sudden Nebraska's offense is really taking off. So once we get into that next week, I'm probably going to be a little bit nervous going into that game as well.
Yeah, as well you should be, because over the last several weeks, Ohio State's been kind of lethargic, regardless of when the kickoff and who the opponent is. So we certainly have reason to be concerned going into that game on November 3rd.
Mm-hmm. Well, Chip, one good thing that happened on Saturday night, maybe the only good thing that happened on Saturday night, is that Art Schlichter's name was stricken from the top of the individual game passing yards record, as we talked about earlier, 470 yards passing for Dwayne Haskins. The third time he's gone over 400 yards already this season?
Yes, the third time. And as you said, I mean, he not only he surpassed Art Schlichter, but I think it would be fair to say he obliterated the previous marks that Art Schlichter had made with regards to attempts, completions, and yards.
Right, the old completions
now,
mark, he had tied at 33, right? And now it's 49.
right,
49
right.
completions and 73 attempts. That is, Chip, that's a run and shoot offense.
It is, and that's kind of where Ohio State, they've lost their way. They need, as entertaining as it is to see an NFL's caliber quarterback throwing it all over. The simple fact is that Ohio State not being able to run the ball when they need to or want to, kind of what we were talking about earlier in the podcast with regards to the red zone difficulties. That, I mean, you even said it yourself that they put up well over 500 plus yards of total offense and only were able to muster 20 points as a result.
It's not good enough. Chip, this is not a knock on Dwayne Haskins. He's phenomenal. He's an unbelievable talent, and any school in the country would love to have him. But Urban Meyer, knowing his offense, knowing the way he likes to play football, and knowing the way he recruited players to play his system, was it a mistake to let Joe Burrow go and keep Dwayne Haskins installed as the starter?
It certainly is pointing towards that way. And the evidence is in 2010 when Urban Meyer was without Tim Tebow and he had John Brantley. And then in 2015 here at Ohio State when he had Cardale Jones, the concern that fans like myself had was, all right, Urban Meyer does not seem to do well when he has a passing first quarterback. And it seemed as though in the first few games that, all right, well, maybe those concerns were, misplaced. But the fact that Joe Burrow has the mobility that Dwayne Haskins lacks, it kind of lends some credence to the theory that, why Urban Meyer allowed or selected Dwayne Haskins as the starter. Maybe the offense would be more productive if Burrow had stuck around.
Right, and again, not a slight on Haskins. It's just, you got to have the parts to run the machine, the right parts. I mean, if you put the wrong power supply in your Apple computer, it's not going to run as good as if you use the one that you're supposed to have in there, right? So it's kind of that kind of thing. I'm not saying Joe Burrow is the be all end all. I know he's not been perfect at LSU, but he's the one thing that kid is he's smart and he's tough and he adapts well. He does run well. He handles the ball well, so you can run those zone reads. He knows when to tuck and run. We had a play the other night where Haskins, he saw everybody at the line of scrimmage. He checked into a play because he thought a blitz was coming, and Purdue backed out of it and rushed 3. And where you might think, well, this is perfect. Now he can just sit back there and wait for somebody to break open. He's got 5 linemen and only 3 men to block. He kind of panicked and took off with the ball and ran in, tried to run through 8 guys. And that's not something that I would have expected Joe Burrow to do. I think he would have probably, even if he missed the read, I think he would have said, oh, okay, well, I'm going to adjust now. I see that they didn't do what I thought they were going to do, and I'm either going to do this or I'm going to throw it away or whatever. I'll sit back here, see if somebody doesn't break open. I'll either check down or I'll throw it out of bounds or whatever. But I think Dwayne was a little off all night. Kirk Herbstreit was talking about his footwork and how he rushed a few of those passes, especially the goal line one where the snap was a little slow getting to him. The one that you and I both believe that KJ would have been short of the goal line anyway, and just hated the play call. I mean, just hated it. It's easy to say when it doesn't work that you hated the play call, but even if it worked, while the ball was in the air, I already said I hate the play call. But it is what it is, and I'm not saying that the team would be appreciably better off with Joe Burrow. I just wonder if sometimes you see the shiny new toy and you want it, but it's not really what you need.
Well, I think you were onto something about using your analogy of the right power source, with a laptop. Mm-hmm. By the same token, all right, making sure that you're using your analogy of the computer. Well, I want I'm going to try to record a podcast using my printer. Okay, well, doesn't really work. You know what I mean? Like, that's not what it's designed for. So using that analogy, it's okay. Well, why, if you're going to use this shiny new toy, so to speak, I'm going to use Dwayne Haskins. Let's use him the right way. Let's quit trying to make him. I mean, you said it best. Instead of making a few weeks ago, instead of trying to make Dwayne like JT, let Dwayne be Dwayne, and do it that way. And it just seems as though that's kind of where I was going with the 2010 Urban Florida John Brantley, the 2015 Urban Cardale Jones Ohio State. That let's try to run the offense that I'm familiar with guys who aren't really well equipped to do it. And it just seems as though that's kind of what Ohio State they don't seem comfortable in their own skin. They just don't seem, when it comes to, I mean, you were talking about hating the play call. It just seems as though this team offensively, we've well documented the issues they have with running the ball and trying to figure that out. With their passing game, it just seems as though, okay, well, let's run a bunch of screens of various types and deep passes. And that doesn't seem too difficult to figure out, because Purdue was able to negate and think about on Saturday night, Paris Campbell, KJ Hill, we already talked about, those kind of plays the opposing defense was able to quickly figure out. So it just seems as though that they have not figured out what it is that Dwayne can do very well, and matching the personnel to allow for the success.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think hurt against Purdue too is probably one of the weakest games of the season in terms of the wide receiver blocking. We didn't see those excellent blocks on the edges like we'd seen in the past. There were at least 2 or 3 plays where I think Dobbins ended up a couple yards shy of a first down because of a block that didn't get made, or there was a tunnel screen where the guy didn't get to his spot and make his block, and then his man made the tackle for no gain. There were several plays like that, but when you run that kind of offense and they have their they read their keys and they execute, and you don't, then you have a 49-20 loss. And that's what happened. So anyway, let's turn the page on Purdue, because it makes me sick that there's no reason this team should line up on any given night against Purdue and struggle the way that it did. And the coaches have a lot of soul searching to do, and they've got a lot to fix. This is still not over by any stretch of the imagination. If Ohio State wins out, which again is tall order considering who's left on the schedule, and the fact that you just lost by 29 points to Purdue, there's still an opportunity here. You run the table, you're still getting in the Big Ten championship game, and if you win that, you're more than likely in the Final Four.
I will agree with you to a certain extent, and that is by winning out, the Ohio State will win the Big Ten championship. The reason why I'm not willing to put them in the college football playoff discussion is, yes, they'll probably be discussed, but Ohio State fans probably acknowledge the fact that they were blown out last year on the road at Iowa. They were blown out on the road at Purdue. And now I think Ohio State, what they can control is everything that you just laid out, is that they can win out and win the Big Ten. And after that, everything else is in the hands of the College Football Playoff Committee. But the idea of winning the Big Ten championship is still well within their grasp. And that has to be the focus. The idea of the playoff, I think, has to be completely taken out of discussion, simply because it's beyond their control. Everything that's within their control is the Big Ten.
Right.
And focusing on the improvement during the bye week, and then getting ready for Nebraska, going on the road to Michigan State, going on the road to Maryland, and then coming home against Michigan, which is looking very, very formidable. It does not if anything, it does not warm my heart. If anything, it sends a chill down my spine to say those words.
Yeah.
That they're looking better and better while Ohio State is regressing. So that's where I go to the fact that if you want to kind of take control of the narrative, it has to start with getting better during this bye week and taking it to Nebraska and winning out, and then you can say that you've won the Big Ten championship, and where your destination takes you after that is completely up to the College Football Playoff Committee.
That's true, but I will say this, Chip, that the blowout from Iowa was the second loss of the season, not the first. They had already lost a game. And this is a team that if it wins out, it's going to beat a Michigan State team that's maybe ranked, maybe others receiving votes layer, and probably a top 5 Michigan team. So that's going to give you the recency bias. Then if you beat a Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship game or in Iowa, then you're looking a lot more attractive. And I still think there's going to be some chaos amongst the other top teams. So I'm pretty confident that if Ohio State wins out and wins the Big Ten championship, they'll be in the college football playoff. I know that this is not something that the players should focus on. It's definitely not something the coaching staff will be focusing on. They'll be focusing on Nebraska, and rightfully so, because they cannot afford to look past that. They have to get things fixed. They have to have tunnel vision, come in with an all-star game plan, get the team ready to execute that game plan, and just go from there, because this team needs that kind of guidance and that kind of attention to detail. I think people just underestimate how much leadership was lost on this team over the last year. I mean, JT Barrett was an incredible leader. Regardless of what you think of him as a quarterback, he was a winner. He was a smart guy. He was a guy who had the respect of his entire team. Billy Price, same thing, smart guy, respect of his teammates, leaders on defense that left. And something that happened since we last spoke, because it happened on the night or on the day that we normally record, and we had already recorded a day early last week, is Nick Bosa's gone. He's not coming back this year. He apparently got some news that at the earliest he probably wouldn't be ready to play football until mid-December. So he withdrawing from Ohio State to concentrate on his NFL career. And there's been a lot of angst about this, a lot of columns written about it. I don't have any problem with what Nick did, considering this was going to be his last year no matter what, and it doesn't really make sense for him to return for one game. Where are you on this?
Well, no, I'm glad you brought up the Nick Bosa departure, because I certainly wish him nothing but the best, because I agree with everyone who says that he's making the right decision when offered the opportunity to get better and possibly secure financial, you could say generational wealth for not only himself, but for his family. I think is an important thing that he's doing. On the selfish side, and I'm just going to speak for myself. The selfish side is when I think of watching Nick Bosa, just think over the last couple of years, Nick Bosa was part of the defensive line rotation, so he was not a starter. I mean, he played well whenever he had the opportunity to do so, mm-hmm. But it was kind of, it was one of these things where the last couple of years people would say, how much better he'd be, but Ohio State plays him because he's just part of a rotation. So this was the year that Ohio State fans were going to finally get a chance to see what Nick Bosa could do. Got to see him play for, I'll just say, about a half against Oregon State and maybe a half against Rutgers, mm-hmm. because Ohio State blew out both of those teams, and then he was playing against TCU and was hurt. So the selfish part of me was, man, finally get a chance to see this guy play for what should have been his final season in Columbus, and then he was hurt. So that's where the selfish side of me comes in. The only thing that I wish that you touched on, the leadership that's missing, and I understand why he's not there, but I wish he was in Columbus simply for that missing leadership, for the fact that he was elected a captain. And I think that team, granted, he can't play, and I would certainly not want him to do anything that would jeopardize his future health. But for him to be involved in meetings and encouraging his teammates, especially within that defensive line room who are missing him so dramatically, that's where I wish that he was in Columbus, because that leadership, that vacuum, I think is I think that's a contributing factor as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could see that part of it as well. It's always going to be the great regret of Nick Bosa's career is that we didn't get to see him for the full season in his final year at Ohio State, and in all of the special plays he would have made. And not only that, but the special plays he would have enabled others to make by occupying so much of the opposition's attention. Because one of the things that he was able to do is, if he was double and sometimes even triple teamed, is that opens everything up for those guys in the middle. It opens up things for Chase Young, who was, again, very much a missing ingredient on Saturday night. He's prone to disappearing in games, and we've seen that. I mean, just tremendous game against Penn State, and really not a whole lot since on Chase Young's part. But that's something that Nick Bosa brought out, and I'm going to miss him and miss having a Bosa wearing the number in the 90s there on the end of the line for Ohio State. But next man up. This team has a lot of talented defensive ends. They've recruited so many that it's almost been to the detriment of the defensive tackle position at times, and they're going to need to step up. But someone's going to have to be a leader on that defense. Jordan Fuller certainly fits the bill. Draymond Jones should be a leader on that defense, and we'll have to see if those guys can rally their troops. But yeah, Nick's not walking through that door unless it's as a spectator, and it's a shame. Have we got that Bosa cloning program off the ground yet?
We're working on it.
All right.
We're working on it. That's keep it on the download, but we're working on it.
All right.
So yeah, if anything, you mentioned Draymond Jones. I think I keep going back to it. This team is tired.
Yeah.
They're just physically. Draymond Jones has been battling something over the last month. Robert Landers. I mean, you could rattle. I mean, for example, Damon Arnett didn't even play on Saturday. This bye week is coming at a crucial time, and for all of the grief, fair or unfair, that the coaching staff is taking from the fan base, the simple reality is these players need this bye week just to kind of mentally recharge their batteries, as well as physically give their bodies a break.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, Purdue players won like every Big Ten player of the week at every position this week. So congrats to them. And, the only good thing about this is that Tyler Trent did get to see his team pull the big upset. I mean, that was a story that I think a lot of people were touched by. I know that it's kind of annoying at times if you're the opposition team and you're the favorite, and they seem to be drumming up this almost a manufactured drama because they're doing this human interest story during a football game. But there's some merit to it, and certainly I don't begrudge anybody getting an opportunity to see something special out of their football team, even though I hate that it came at the expense of mine. A lot of people pointed to the sick kids in the hospital at Iowa being a big story during that game, and then this one, Tyler Trent. Did you have any issues with that at all?
No, I that young man, what he's going through, his family and friends. It's a heartwarming story that he was able to attend the game. Yes, I'm with you. I wish it had been any other team except Ohio State. For example, Purdue's playing Michigan State this weekend. Why couldn't it have been against Michigan State? But in all seriousness, it didn't bother me. If anything, the human interest aspect of it, I understand why the nation was so captivated by it. I certainly wish nothing but the best for this young man, for everything he's going through, and for his family and friends to keep up the love and encouragement that they are giving him. And if anything, you rattled off a few moments ago about Ohio State with their season, and we talked about it getting back to the whole Purdue thing. Purdue only the 3 games that they lost were by a total of 8 points. And Purdue, you mentioned Iowa and Wisconsin, and it would not be entirely surprising if Ohio State can right their ship and win the Big Ten East to see that Purdue team again in the Big Ten championship. Is all I'm going to say. Is that Purdue team. I know that Iowa is probably looking the best right now out of the Big Ten West, but it would not be surprising if Purdue, if they can figure out what they're doing defensively, because they have their issues on that side of the ball. If they can figure out what they're doing, it would not be surprising if Purdue was the Big Ten West champion for 2018.
That is possible. The wild, wild West is wide open. It just goes back to my old saying: Purdue or Purdue not. There is no per try.
Yes, yeah. That is true.
Anyway, I have a problem with the Tyler Trent stuff. I know it went a little long. Tom Rinaldi had some conversations with him during the game while the game was being shown, and that bothered some folks. And I guess my thought on it is, football is football, and this is a human being who's going through something incredibly difficult and horrible. So I kind of just gritted my teeth and got through it, because I don't think ABC is doing that to drum up support for Purdue. I think ABC is doing that because this is a tangential part of this game, because of so much of the buildup was for him by the team and his relationship to the team, and it was something that needed to be talked about, and it wasn't anti-Ohio State, and it wasn't pro Purdue. It was pro Tyler Trent and what he's going through. So if you were bothered by it, just maybe take a deep breath and find something else to be bothered by, I guess. Chip, before we get out of here, it's a bye week. I really don't like open dates, because that's a college football weekend that I don't get to watch the Buckeyes. But it is what it is, and we live in this day and age when we have these until we go to an extra conference game, probably at some point. But what can Ohio State do during this week to get better?
I think they need to have a very open discussion amongst the coaching staff about what can our players do and what do they have challenges with, and why don't we accentuate the positive of what they can do, and let's build our offensive and defensive schemes around that. I think that's the easiest thing that they can do. So we've already touched on so many of them with regards to simplifying the running game in regards to whether it's by scheme, by personnel, putting in plays that Dwayne Haskins can run well, and trying to limit the plays that he doesn't execute well. As far as the defense, adjusting the scheme with regards to the linebackers, getting them further off the line of scrimmage. With the defensive line, we talked about possibly incorporating more of a rotation, trying to figure out within the secondary, like you said, the safety play, if that means adjusting the personnel. So a lot of different things that they can do during the bye week. I know that the players, I'm not sure if they're all going to leave campus, but encourage the players to rest up as much as possible. If there are therapy sessions that they need to go to for physical ailments, make sure that they're taking care of their bodies during the bye week. And the coaches, when they go out and recruit, that they are, I guess you could say, trying to address the needs that they've identified within their roster for 2019 and beyond.
Yeah, and get the game film loaded up, that Nebraska game film loaded up on those iPads, and study. Look for tells, and look for things you can key on. And I'd be interested to see the linebackers lined up in their normal spots, a few yards off the ball, rather than all across the line of scrimmage. And it was funny. They mentioned Dante Booker had to come off the field on one particular play, and I went, "Really? Dante Booker was on the field? Didn't notice."
Yeah, it's true. I didn't either.
Usually, I noticed. I looked for where Pete Werner was usually before each play. I looked to see if Tuff Borland or Baron Browning was on the field a lot. To see where Malik Harrison was lined up, but I didn't really notice Dante Booker. But I guess he got some snaps. So anyway, linebackers need fixed. Isaiah Pryor, I thought, did a really nice job in the run game on Saturday for the most part. I definitely didn't like him letting go of Rondale Moore late in the game to let him get away for a long, big play. But that was a weird play. It was just like, I got him wrapped up, but I'm not going to bring him down. I'm just going to let go. I'm
going to throw him and think that that's going to be sufficient.
Yeah, and then Chris Fowler just raved about Rondale Moore's strength, and I'm like, it's bad. That's bad tackling. That's not strength.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, you brought up Chris Spielman, who we both, that's, in terms of like mutual admiration of Chris Spielman.
Wrap up, young man.
That's what Chris Spielman, that's one of the things that he's identified as an issue with this team, is that the tackling definitely needs improvement. Mm-hmm. So that could be another area.
All right. Well, we will come back, Chip, next week and on the bye week, and we will talk about Nebraska. We'll preview that game. We'll maybe I'll have a chance to see a little bit more film on them and get a little bit more in depth of what they're bringing, because it looks like Scott Frost has them finally trending the correct way. There's been some crazy games. Indiana played really well against Penn State. So you never know what's going to happen. I look forward to watching a lot of college football on Saturday and not having to worry about the Ohio State game or writing a grumpy old Buckeye, column. If you care to read it after a loss, if you care to read about the Buckeyes after a loss, not everybody does, go over to the-ozone.net at the Hayes and Cannon section. That's where you can find Chip and me writing our weekly columns, and you can read the grumpy old Buckeye. That's my thing after every game. Chip, where else can people find you on the internet?
I can be found on Twitter at Chip Minnich, Minnich is how I spell my last name. And then for those of you who disagreed with my prediction of the Ohio State at Purdue game last week, I genuinely appreciate the civil tone that was displayed during I'm being completely serious. Nobody was out of line. I didn't have to block or mute anybody. People disagreed with me, but I think they kind of understand where I was coming from. Mm-hmm. That it was certainly not with my hope that Ohio State would lose. It was just that's how I saw it. Mm-hmm. So I genuinely appreciate the comments and the questions and things like that. And I'm going to, on Saturday, since Ohio State's not playing, I'm going to use this as an opportunity at noon to watch Purdue play Michigan State, who is going to be playing Ohio State 2 weeks from Saturday. So kind of like a sneak preview of a Buckeye opponent that just to get a feel for how they do. I know Michigan State's coming off that loss to Michigan, but just to see how Purdue handles prosperity as well as how Michigan State handles adversity.
Now, based on how everybody typically does after playing Ohio State, I expect the strength of schedule will go down with a big Sparty win, but you never know.
You're probably right.
But Chip, no one could ever accuse you of being a homer, since you did predict Purdue would win, but you couched it so much in "I hope I'm wrong" that you obviously are a homer.
Well, it was, let's just say that besides the comments that I received on Twitter, some people that on a personal notice, especially over some alcoholic beverages, were a little bit more colorful in their disagreements with me,
Yeah.
so which was fine, which is, it's the kind of thing where I try to, I said it last week, I'll just reiterate it. It's like I try to make my picks with the head and not from the heart. And, sometimes it's kind of difficult with, going by what you see. It's one of those old scouting adages is that, go by what you see, not by what you have read or what you have heard, but what you see. And what I saw kind of the surprise wasn't that Purdue won. It was the fact that Ohio State, as we discussed during our podcast tonight, that it was Ohio State's sputtering offense. That was the surprise. So let's hope for during that bye week that Ohio State, the coaching staff, the players, they figure out what is ailing them and get it corrected for Nebraska on November 3rd.
Yeah, have one of those closed-door player-only meetings. Those seem to work a lot.
Maybe.
I was actually surprised, Chip, at how many people. I think a lot of the comments in our staff predictions column were, basically, Ohio State's this and that, and they're going to win. But I didn't see a lot of necessarily disagreeing with us. But there were even a few people that surprised me that said, hey, the guys that are predicting that Ohio State will lose, they have obviously been paying attention. So there were actually some folks that were not surprised as we were not surprised. But I would have never been happier to have eaten crow than after that prediction. I really kind of wanted to come on this podcast and just talk about, wow, I was really wrong, and I was really glad to be wrong. They really got their act together at the right time, and now they get a bye week, and then they can get ready for the stretch run. But now a lot more concern going into that bye week and that stretch run coming up. But I think that I have confidence that at least the head coach of this football team is adept at getting his team to play, at getting things fixed. He typically does. I think has he lost a game in every single championship season that he's had?
I want to say you're correct. I think you're right.
So I think that's a prerequisite for a national championship with Urban Meyer. The main concern is that these lopsided losses the last several years have been more frequent in his career than ever before, and it's hard to explain it, but for the most part, you complain as much as you want, but I think that's only 9 losses in his career at Ohio State, and that's just being spoiled if you are calling for a new coach at this point.
Oh, anyone who's calling for a new head coach, I think, be careful what you wish for. Why don't you go and ask, some of the teams around the country that have run out successful coaches and see how they're doing. So let's not, the sky is not falling. No. Okay. It, like you said, 9 losses in 7 years. I'll take that without a doubt.
Let's see what happens. It's still, for me, a successful season if the team goes out and beats the team up north, and it's even a more successful season if they get to Indy, and even more successful than that if they win that game. Anything above that is it's like the NCAA tournament in basketball. There's just so many variables, so many things that could go wrong. Anything you get beyond that is gravy, and it's nobody's birthright to be there. We're not all Alabama. I'm sorry. It just doesn't work that way. And I have theories on why Alabama is able to do it. I can't prove anything, but I have my theories, and I'll just leave it at that.
Okay.
Just leave it at that. Anyway, Chip, people can listen to the Ozone Radio Network. We have a lot of good programs.
Yes, we've got, besides obviously this Sterling podcast, we referenced Across the Field. We talked about the Buckeye Sloopcast previously, as well as the Sons of Schmidt. So a lot of tremendous Ohio State insight that you can glean from the Ozone Radio Network.
Yeah, and I see what you did there. It's calling this is the silver bullet. You called it Sterling, so that's like Sterling silver.
I try.
Yeah, Sons of Schmidt, Across the Field, and the Buckeye Sloopcast, all fine programs on the Ozone Radio Network. Give them a listen. Please read our stuff over at the ozone.net. The Hazen Cannon section is where you can find us. And, we have good content all week, even on bye weeks. So please, check everything out. Please subscribe to us on iTunes. Leave us some nice feedback, if you will. Give us your star ratings. Let us know how we're doing. We can't improve unless we get some feedback from you.
Precisely.
And I think we all agree that improvement would be good.
Oh, and not just within the Ozone Radio Network, but within the Ohio State football department as well.
Exactly. We would love to see some improvement there, especially coming off of this one. But so, Chip, you and I will do this again next week, of course. And, I will say that we don't have a lot of ratings, but I like seeing that our average is 5 stars on iTunes.
It's nice to know.
Yeah. So, and I'm almost positive every single one of these is from when you and Shannon were doing the show and before I came on.
I don't know about that.
Anyway, so we'll do it again next week. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And, it's a bye week, but go Bucks.
Go Bucks.